Okay, so we're getting it started in a little bit of a spicy way tonight. A conversation during uh, about the jobs that are listed in the directory. Um, Richard brought up MAD and said it was a madam, and I said no way, and he said yes. So I ended up wanting to make sure that that was what that was, and to see if there was any cross-referencing and if we could find out anything more about those women who have the word mad after their name. Um, so basically the city directory it's a residential directory, but it's also a business directory. And these women, if they are running brothels, then they're in the mode of business. I created a subset of 29 women who listed MAD as their job. And it was a really pretty rich source of data because it was pretty easy to see that they were stuck into, if you can see my mouse, sort of just in among the regular residents in an alphabetical order with the name after them. In the abbreviations used for work, it's not in there. So there had to be some assumption as to what that abbreviation would indicate. So I did some culture research, contextual historical research on prostitution in the early 1900s. And I did find that other city directories also listed MAD, only that was at the beginning. So I guess how the publisher wanted to let it happen. So I worked with my data set. I cleaned it up. I separated it out. I kind of made it granular so that I could see where they lived, what streets they were on. So I had essentially one big group of women, sort of indistinguishable. We just knew they had MAD as they were madams. So I looked at their geography and found that they basically lived on 4 streets. There was one outlier. For some reason, there's a madam living on Boundary Alley, but we're not sure exactly why. She seems to be alone doing her work. But so I created this graphic to just show that out of the 29, 28, if you don't count the woman in Boundary, they lived in clusters, but they were independently named in the homes. There was no one else named. So I took a look at the insurance maps, because one of the things that the research had said was that Sanborn would put FB on a cluster of houses that they knew to be female brothels. So they called it female boarding, but that was essentially a restricted area. But on one side of the street, it says FB, which is female boarding. The other side says D, which was for dwelling. That means that it was just where some people lived. And some of our madams live over here. So the interesting thing is, why would they only put it on one side of the street? But if you look at the map, you see they share a lot with public school number 7. So it would be strange to put FB on the same side as the public school. This is also in the, quote, colored neighborhood. All of these clusters are tucked into Black neighborhoods. So I went to the 1910 US Census to see if I could find out anything more about the women who lived, who were doing this work, and see if I could match up any addresses or anything. And I expanded the data set to include things, which was great, because I found out that most of them were in their 20s, their early 20s, that they all said they were the head of the household, that they all spoke English, and I found out their occupation, and they all kind of said the same sort of things to the census. There were only 14 of them that I could match for sure in the out of the 29. We know that this is maybe not a job that you stay in for a really long time. If I'm getting close to my time, Richard, let me know. I lost track. So out of the occupations, they're all seamstresses, dressmakers, and one was a housekeeper. So that that was one of those jobs you could do at home. You could just say that you were making dresses and, doing people's laundry and stuff like that. So maybe it was easier than saying to the census taker probably what your real job was. So then I also what was also interesting, they all said they could read and write. 100% of the 14, like, well, I mean, it's 14, but they all could read and write, which is an interesting mark, and I'll come back to that in a second. They were all listed as white. But if we look a little closer at the directory, which has cross-referencing, there's a little bit of conflicting information that that would be really interesting. I found it kind of later in my research, and it would be really interesting to see how much of this cross-references. So when I was looking here at the, let me see what I have here. Yeah, right, cross list of the madams here. If you can't see because it's very small, right here under madam, Carrie Copeland has an asterisk next to her name. She does not have one in the full listing of the residences, of the residential listing. She's no asterisks at all. She has one here, and she's at a half mark. She's at 807 1/2, which is a very strange thing on the Sanborn map. But that is hers. So she didn't. So where is the misinformation? So I also looked a little closer at, and I'm going to have to pop out of this because I couldn't get this PDF thing to tell me. So I found a Carrie Copeland. Let's see if it'll bring it up. In Charlotte in the census in 1910. And she was a female boarder, and she was married, and she could read and write. She had 3 children, or she was been married 3 years, and she has 1 child. And she lived with other people, including this gentleman, Alexander Copeland. If that is her husband, because we can go over here. Oh, and it says that her race is Black. We go over here to Alexander Copeland. If he is her husband, because he also has been married 3 years and has 1 living child and lived with all the people, if we look at this, he could not read or write. And he was a wage earner. There may be a bigger story there. We may not be able to tell it, but it may be a bit more complicated than simply an asterisk being there. There may be more there in terms of what people have to do. So in conclusion, I have a little funny thing here. This was another interesting cross-reference. If you are looking for a brothel, they give you directions. Go east from Alexander to Myers, 1st Street off Stonewall. Just to make sure, you're traveling, maybe you don't know your way around, they give you the exact directions. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. I have no idea how much time that was.